The blinking cursor on the screen was a tiny, mocking heartbeat counting down the seconds to eviction. Chloe stared at the negative balance in her bank account, a glowing red wound that mirrored the hollow ache in her stomach. Outside her cramped dorm-style apartment, the city hummed with a life she felt utterly disconnected from, a symphony of sirens and laughter that only amplified her own silence. 18 years old, a scholarship student with a course load that felt like a physical weight on her shoulders, and she was failing. Not at her studies. Her grades were pristine, a testament to sleepless nights fueled by cheap instant coffee, but at the simple, brutal art of survival. The part-time library job barely covered her textbooks, let alone the rent that was now 2 weeks overdue. The final notice was taped to her door, its official letterhead a stark reminder that her dream of a better life was balanced on the edge of a knife. She'd eaten nothing but ramen for a week, the salty broth a poor substitute for real nourishment. Her stomach churned with a mixture of hunger and anxiety. It was in this state of quiet desperation that she saw the email. The subject line was cryptic. A unique professional engagement. She almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, another offer for a credit card she couldn't get, or a miracle product she couldn't afford. But something made her pause. It had been forwarded by a professor in the arts department, someone she'd only had for one elective, with a short, impersonal note. This may be of interest to students seeking temporary, high-remuneration work. She clicked it open. The language was formal, corporate, yet the request was anything but. It spoke of needing a companion for a high-profile corporate gala. The role required elegance, discretion, and the ability to project an image of warm companionship. The compensation was a number so large it seemed like a typo. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life, enough to pay her rent for a year, to buy groceries without calculating every penny, to breathe. A cold knot of fear and suspicion formed in her gut. This wasn't right. It was too easy, too clean. Yet the desperation was a stronger force. The blinking cursor, the red numbers, the eviction notice, they were real. This email, this bizarre offer, was a lifeline, however strange and suspect. With a trembling hand, she typed her reply. I am interested in learning more. The response came within minutes, as if someone had been waiting, watching. The instructions were meticulous, leaving no room for questions. A car would pick her up the following evening. A dress would be provided. She was to bring nothing but herself. A significant portion of the payment had already been transferred to her account as a sign of good faith. Chloe refreshed her banking app, her breath catching in her throat. The red numbers were gone, replaced by a staggering, beautiful black figure. The relief was so sudden and overwhelming it felt like a physical blow, leaving her lightheaded. For a few moments, she just stared, the reality of it slow to sink in. This was real. The money was real. And with it came a tidal wave of anxiety that was even colder than the fear of poverty. Who were these people? What did they truly want from her? The instructions were clear. She was to be a date, a placeholder, a beautiful accessory for a man she had never met. She was being paid to pretend. The idea was both demeaning and strangely liberating. For one night, she could shed the skin of the struggling student, the girl who reused tea bags and worried about the electricity bill. She could be someone else, someone elegant and carefree. The next day was a blur of nervous energy. A courier delivered a heavy, unmarked garment bag. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a dress the color of a midnight forest. It was made of silk that felt like liquid in her hands, cut with a simple, breathtaking elegance she'd only ever seen in magazines. There were shoes, too, with heels that seemed impossibly delicate, and a small, velvet box containing a simple pearl necklace. Trying them on, she looked in her small, cracked mirror and saw a stranger. The dress transformed her, masking the weariness in her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. It gave her a borrowed grace, a temporary armor. As evening fell, a sleek black car, silent as a shadow, pulled up to her curb. The driver, a man with a face like carved stone, simply held the door open for her. The interior smelled of leather and quiet power. As they glided through the city streets, leaving her world of peeling paint and noisy neighbors behind, Chloe felt a profound sense of dislocation. She was crossing a threshold, leaving her own life to step into someone else's, and she had no idea what she would find on the other side. The car ascended a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment that seemed to float among the clouds. The view of the city, sprawling and glittering below, was so vast it made her feel insignificant. The space was a study in minimalist luxury, dark wood, brushed steel, vast panes of glass. It was beautiful but sterile, like a museum exhibit on wealth. A man stood with his back to her, looking out at the city. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light. When he turned, she felt her rehearsed pleasantries die on her lips. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp, intelligent features and eyes that held a deep, settled sadness. This was not the flashy, arrogant tycoon she had pictured. This was someone carrying an immense weight. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice a low, quiet baritone. "I am Park Min-jun. Thank you for coming." There was no warmth in his greeting, only a formal politeness. The terms were acceptable? She nodded, unable to find her voice. "Good," he continued, his gaze direct and unervingly perceptive. "The rules for tonight are simple. You will stay by my side. You will smile when I smile. When people speak to you, you will be pleasant but vague. If anyone asks how we met, you will say, through a mutual friend. You will refer to me as Min-jun. You will not ask me any personal questions about my business or my life. In essence, you are here to create the impression of a stable, pleasant partnership. Do you understand?" It was cold, transactional. He was hiring a performer, nothing more. Chloe felt a prickle of indignation, but swallowed it down. This was the job. This was for the money. "I understand," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He gave a curt nod of approval. Just as the silence began to stretch into something uncomfortable, a small voice piped up from the side. "Papa? Is she the one?" A little girl, no older than 7, stepped out from behind a large sofa. She was a miniature porcelain doll, dressed in a frilly light pink dress that contrasted sharply with the room's severe decor. She had her father's dark, serious eyes, which were fixed on Chloe with an unnerving intensity. Min-jun's entire demeanor softened in an instant, the hard edges melting away as he looked at his daughter. "Hannah, this is Miss Collins. She is going to be my friend for the party tonight." Hannah took a few cautious steps forward, her head tilted as she scrutinized Chloe from head to toe. The child's gaze was more intimidating than her father's. Chloe felt herself being judged on a level far more profound than her ability to follow instructions. Hannah stopped a few feet from Chloe, her tiny hands clasped behind her back. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city far below. Min-jun stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold as if it were a delicate chemical reaction he dared not disturb. Chloe, feeling the weight of both their gazes, offered the little girl a small, tentative smile. She knelt down slightly, trying to bring herself closer to the child's level, an instinct she hadn't realized she possessed. The dark green silk of her dress pooled around her feet. "It's very nice to meet you, Hannah," Chloe said softly. Hannah did not smile back. Her expression remained one of solemn consideration. "Your dress is pretty," she stated, not as a compliment, but as a simple fact. "Thank you," Chloe replied. "I think your dress is very pretty, too." "Pink is a wonderful color. My mama liked pink," Hannah said, her voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken loss.
Miniones jo tightened almost imperceptibly.
Chloe's heart gave a painful lurch. This wasn't just a cold businessman needing a date. This was a grieving father and his daughter, navigating a world of sharp edges. "I'm sure she did," Chloe said gently, her voice full of a sincerity that surprised even herself. "It's a happy color." Hannah took another step closer, her curiosity overriding her shyness. She reached out a small hand and, after a moment's hesitation, gently touched the fabric of Chloe's dress. It's soft, then she looked up, her dark eyes wide and piercingly direct. "Are you going to be my new mama?" The question was a thunderclap in the quiet room. Chloe's breath hitched. She looked helplessly at Min-jun, whose face had become an unreadable mask of stone, but his eyes betrayed a flash of deep pain. He made no move to intervene, leaving Chloe to navigate this impossible moment on her own. She knew her answer mattered. A simple no would be a rejection. A lie would be cruel. She chose a careful, gentle truth. "No, sweetie," she said, her voice soft as a prayer. "I'm just a friend of your papa's for tonight. But I am very happy I get to meet you." Hannah seemed to consider this, her brow furrowed. She then turned and ran to a small table in the corner, returning with a piece of paper. She held it out to Chloe. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright crayon. There were two figures, a very tall man and a small girl in a pink dress, holding hands under a large, smiling yellow sun. There was a conspicuous, empty space on the other side of the man. "This is me and Papa," Hannah explained. "I can draw you in if you want. We have room." The simple offer, the crayon drawing with its glaringly empty space, was more intimate and revealing than any conversation. It was a map of a small child's heart, charting her loneliness and her hope. Chloe felt a lump form in her throat. She took the drawing carefully, as if it were a precious artifact. "It's beautiful, Hannah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a very good artist." She looked from the drawing to Min-jun, who was watching her, his guard lowered for just a fraction of a second, revealing a raw vulnerability that startled her. In that moment, she saw not a mafia boss or a client, but a man drowning in grief, tethered to the world only by the small hand of his daughter. The grand ballroom was a dizzying assault on the senses. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of people dressed in silks and jewels. The air hummed with hushed power, the clinking of glasses, and the murmur of conversations that could likely decide the fate of corporations or topple unseen empires. Chloe felt like a fraud, a common stone placed among diamonds. Yet, Min-jun's hand was a firm, warm presence at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd with an effortless authority. He navigated the room like a shark in its element, nodding curtly to some, offering a tight, humorless smile to others. Every eye was on them, their gazes a mixture of curiosity, envy, and calculation. He brought a date. She heard someone whisper. "She's new." Chloe focused on the instructions. "Smile. Be pleasant, be vague." She played her part, a silent, beautiful enigma on the arm of a powerful man. When they were finally left alone for a moment, he leaned in, his voice low. "You are doing well. I feel like everyone is staring," she confessed, her voice barely audible over the orchestra. "They are," he confirmed, without a trace of apology. "They're looking for weakness. A happy man is a strong man. Tonight, we are happy." The cold pragmatism of his words should have chilled her, but it didn't. It was honest. Later, he led her to the dance floor. She tensed, certain she would stumble or make a fool of herself. But he was a surprisingly graceful leader. He held her with a formal, respectful distance, yet she could feel the tension coiled in his body. They moved in silence for a few minutes, two strangers performing a pantomime of intimacy for a captive audience. "The song," he said suddenly, his voice quiet. "My wife, she loved this piece." It was a small crack in his armor, a detail so personal it felt like a betrayal of his own rules. Chloe didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply met his eyes, and in that brief, shared glance across the dance floor, something shifted. The performance became a little less of a lie. They found their way to a secluded balcony that overlooked the city's glittering expanse. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling heat and social pressure of the ballroom. Below them, the city was a river of light, anonymous and beautiful. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was different out here. It wasn't awkward or tense, but contemplative. Chloe leaned against the cold stone balustrade, the silk of her dress a whisper against her skin. She was acutely aware of Min-jun standing beside her, not looking at her, but staring out at the same view. He had shed the public mask of the formidable businessman. Here, in the semi-darkness, he just looked tired. "I hate these events," he said, his voice low and stripped of its earlier command. It was a simple, honest admission. "They are a necessary part of my world. Appearances must be maintained. Stability must be projected at all times. It must be exhausting," Chloe found herself saying, the words slipping out before she could stop them. He turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "More than you can imagine," he replied. A beat of silence passed. "Why did you take this job, Miss Collins?" The question wasn't an accusation. It was born of genuine curiosity. He was trying to understand the pieces of the puzzle he had assembled for the evening. Chloe hesitated, then decided on the same kind of honesty he had just offered her. "My rent was due," she said simply, without embellishment or a plea for sympathy. "I was going to be evicted." She expected him to recoil, to have his illusion of her as an elegant companion shattered by the stark reality of her poverty. Instead, he just nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his sad eyes. "We all have our cages," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Yours is made of money, and mine is made of this." He gestured vaguely back toward the ballroom, toward the world of power and violence and expectation that he could never escape. In that moment on the balcony, they were no longer a client and his hired date. They were just two profoundly lonely people, standing together in the dark, recognizing the bars of each other's prisons. A quiet, unspoken alliance formed between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their different lives. The ride back to the penthouse was wrapped in a thick, comfortable silence. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white as the car moved through the sleeping streets. Hannah, who had been whisked away from the party by a discreet nanny hours earlier, had waited up. Now, she was curled on the plush leather seat, fast asleep with her head resting trustingly in Chloe's lap. Her small body rose and fell with each steady breath, and her pink dress was slightly crumpled. Without thinking, Chloe's hand went to the child's head, her fingers gently stroking the soft, dark hair away from her face. It was a simple, maternal gesture that felt entirely natural, as if she had done it 1,000 times before. She felt a surge of protectiveness for this small, sad girl she had only just met. Up front, Minjun drove, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror. He said nothing, but Chloe could see the reflection of his face, softened by the dim dashboard lights. He wasn't watching the road. He was watching her and his daughter. He was watching the easy tenderness in her touch, the peaceful expression on Hannah's face. The entire evening had been a transaction, a carefully orchestrated performance. But this quiet moment in the back of a car was undeniably real. The pretense had evaporated, leaving behind something fragile and true. Chloe was no longer just Miss Collins, the hired companion. And he was no longer just Mr. Park, the client. They were two adults and a child, sharing a space of quiet intimacy that felt more like a family than anything Chloe had experienced in a very long time. As the car pulled into the private garage beneath the skyscraper, she felt a pang of regret. The night was over. The magic, borrowed as it was about to end. Soon, she would be back in her tiny apartment, the beautiful dress returned, the money a stark reminder of the strange world she had briefly inhabited. She would be alone again. The thought left a surprising ache in her chest. She carefully shifted, not wanting to wake Hannah, as Minjun opened her door. He reached in, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently lifted his sleeping daughter into his arms. Hannah murmured something in her sleep and snuggled closer into her father's chest. The sight was so full of love and sorrow that it made Chloe's heart ache. He led her back up to the penthouse. The vast, empty space felt different now, less sterile and more lonely. Minjun carefully laid Hannah in her bed, tucking the covers around her with a practiced gentleness that spoke of countless nights spent doing the same. He closed the door to her room softly before turning back to Chloe, who stood awkwardly by the entrance, ready to depart. The contract was fulfilled. "The remainder of your payment will be transferred in the morning," he said, his voice returning to its formal, businesslike tone. It was a dismissal. "Thank you," Chloe said, her own voice sounding small in the cavernous room. "For everything." She turned to leave, her hand on the doorknob of the private elevator. The dream was over. It was time to go back to reality, to her overdue essays and instant noodles. "Wait," he said, the words sharp and sudden. Chloe paused, her back still to him. She heard him take a step closer. "This evening," he began, then stopped, as if searching for the right words. The polished, powerful man from the party was gone, replaced by someone hesitant and uncertain. Hannah, she liked you. It was a profound understatement. She's a wonderful little girl, Chloe said softly, turning to face him. He looked lost, his hands shoved into his pockets. She doesn't take to people easily. Since her mother, she has been very withdrawn. He was breaking his own rule, sharing personal information, letting her see past the carefully constructed walls. I have a proposition, he said, his voice low and rushed, as if he were afraid the words would fail him if he spoke them too slowly. It is unconventional. Hannah needs someone, a tutor, or a companion, someone to read to her, to take her to the park. The pay would be substantial. Your university schedule would be accommodated. He was offering her a job, but it was so much more than that. He was asking her to stay, using his daughter as the excuse because he didn't know how to ask for himself. He was offering her a place in their quiet, sad world, a chance to be more than a one-night performance. It was a desperate, clumsy, and incredibly heartfelt plea. Chloe stared at him, her mind reeling. This went far beyond the scope of their original agreement. This was an invitation into their lives. Before Chloe could formulate a response, a small, sleepy voice cut through the tension.
Papa.
The door to Hannah's bedroom creaked open, and the little girl stood there, rubbing her eyes, her pink dress a soft splash of color in the dimly lit hall. She must have woken when her father laid her down. Her gaze darted from Minjun to Chloe, who was still standing by the elevator, poised for departure. A look of panic washed over the child's face as she took in the scene. She saw the finality in Chloe's posture, the invisible line of the doorway she was about to cross. The reality that this new, warm presence in her life was temporary crashed down on her. Her lower lip began to tremble. "You're leaving," she whispered, her voice thick with impending tears. Chloe's heart shattered. She took a step toward the child, her hand outstretched, but stopped, unsure of her place. This was not her family, not her child to comfort. Minjun moved quickly to Hannah's side, kneeling before her. "It's late, my love. Miss Collins has to go home." "No," Hannah said, the words small but fierce. She looked past her father, her dark, tear-filled eyes locking onto Chloe. The raw, unfiltered grief of a child who had already lost too much was laid bare. "No," she repeated, her voice rising with desperation. She scrambled past her father and ran to Chloe, wrapping her small arms tightly around her legs, clinging to her as if she were a life raft in a storm. "Don't go," she sobbed into the silk of the dress. The sound was heartbreaking. Minjun rose to his feet, his face a mask of anguish. He was powerless to stop his daughter's pain. Hannah looked up at him then, her face streaked with tears, her expression a mixture of pleading and defiance. She tugged on his trouser leg, her small fist bunching the expensive fabric. "Papa," she cried, her voice echoing in the silent, cavernous apartment. "Can she stay? Please? Can she stay forever?" The question hung in the air between the three of them, a child's impossible, perfect, devastating request. It was more than a question, it was a prayer. It stripped away all pretense, all the rules and contracts and unspoken boundaries, and laid their lonely hearts bare. It demanded an answer that none of them were prepared to give. Minjun looked at Chloe over his daughter's head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The formidable facade was completely gone, replaced by the desperate plea of a father who would do anything to make his child happy again. His gaze held a question he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. "Can you? Will you?" He wasn't her client anymore. He was just a man, asking for help, asking for hope. Chloe looked down at the small girl clinging to her legs, then back at the broken man standing before her. In one night, she had stumbled into the epicenter of their grief. She could leave. She could take the money and walk away, back to her simple, complicated life. It was the logical thing to do. This world of silent cars and immense sadness was not hers. But her heart, a part of her she thought had been numbed by her own struggles, ached with a profound and surprising sense of belonging. She knelt, her expensive dress rustling, and gently cupped Hannah's tear-stained face in her hands. She did not answer the impossible question of forever. Forever was a word for fairy tales. Their lives were far too real for such promises. Instead, she offered a different kind of truth, a smaller, more tangible hope. "I can't stay forever tonight, sweetie," she said, her voice gentle but firm. But, she added, before the child's face could crumple further, I was just talking to your papa. He needs someone to help him look after a very special girl. Someone to read stories with, and maybe even draw some pictures with. I was thinking, I would like that job very much. Hannah's sobs quieted to sniffles. She looked from Chloe to her father, seeking confirmation. Minjun nodded, a wave of immense relief washing over his features, making him look younger. Would you like that, Hannah? He asked softly. If Chloe came back tomorrow? Hannah nodded vigorously, a watery smile finally breaking through her tears. Chloe smiled back, a genuine, unforced smile. She stood up, still feeling the faint warmth of Hannah's arms around her legs. I should go, she said to Minjun. It's late, stay, he said, the word no longer a question or a proposition, but a simple, quiet statement. Stay for breakfast. I'll have my driver take you to your classes in the morning. The offer hung between them, another step across the fragile bridge they had built. It wasn't a contract. It was an invitation. An invitation to a new morning. Chloe looked at the city lights twinkling outside the vast window, then at the man and his daughter. Her own small apartment suddenly seemed a world away, a relic of a life she was no longer sure she wanted to return to. Okay, she said softly. I'll stay for breakfast. In the quiet of the penthouse, as a new day began to dawn over the city, a door that had been locked for a very long time began to creak open.